Alright, hello math fans. Alright, so we spent a little bit of time solving equations using factoring, right? The first type of problem is already factored for you. The second type of problem, you actually had to factor and then set all those different terms equal to 0. Well, I'm going to give you a choice now on what type of problem to use. And the way I'm going to give you a choice, kind of a choice, is I'm going to show you the best way to solve these problems. So this is the deal. If you have, so this is more solving. If you have an x squared term and no x term, and then a 20, let's say minus 25 equals 0. So the problem would really look like x squared minus 25 equals 0. There are two ways you can solve this problem. Okay, the first way is you guys should recognize that we can factor that. That's x plus 5, x minus 5. So I'm going to subtract 5. Of course, well, let's do this one. X plus 5 equals 0. So subtract 5, x equals negative 5. And x minus 5 equals 0, add 5, x equals positive 5. So those are your two answers, okay? That's pretty easy. But if you guys can remember, we actually solved these types of problems earlier in last chapter. Okay, I think it was actually even 2 chapters ago. Here's the problem again. X squared minus 25 equals 0. Don't you guys remember the square root method? The square root method is you solve for the x squared term. So I'm going to add 25 to both sides. Oops. Add 25. There we go. X squared equals 25. And then remember, you take the square root of both sides. And the only thing that is confusing here is don't forget to do the plus or minus. It's not really confusing. It's just something you can't miss. So it's plus or minus 5. We actually get the exact same answer. This is just another way of writing x equals plus or minus 5. So the square root method is really a preferred method if there's no x term. If there's no middle term, you want to use the square root method. But the only thing that I have to warn you about is you have to have plus or minus. Okay, you have to remember that. Because if you only have one answer, you're not going to get full credit for it. In fact, you're going to lose most of the credit for it. Alright, so let's look at another problem here. So if I gave you x squared, let's do 4x squared minus 49 equals 0. Okay, I could factor that, but again, I have no x term. So I'm going to add 49 to both sides. I get 4x squared equals 49. Divide by 4. And you're like, oh man, this is brutal. Not really. I take the square root of both sides. And please, no decimals. If you give me a decimal, I'm marking it wrong. Because there are no decimals here, unless it specifically says round to the nearest tenth or hundredth, or the problem starts out as a decimal. Then I can understand decimal. Otherwise, no decimals. So you're like, well, I understand. How am I supposed to do this problem without a decimal? Well, what's the square root of 49? 7. What's the square root of 4? 2. Okay, is that our answer? Nope. Don't forget, man, plus or minus. Okay? Now, if you did this one by factoring, just going back to this guy right here, by factoring, 4x squared minus 49 equals 0. You guys should recognize those as they're all perfect squares. So square root of 4 is 2 and 2. X squared is x and x. Minus 7 plus 7. Okay, so I get 2x minus 7 equals 0. 2x plus 7 equals 0. So there's more work here. Look what I'm doing, man. 2x equals 7. Divide by 2. X is 7 halves. And the other one, minus 7. So 2x equals negative 7. Divide by 2. And it's x equals negative 7 halves. Alright? This one is definitely, right here, man, this is definitely easier. That's the one I'd probably use. But again, man, don't forget that plus or minus, okay? Because that's the answer. You kind of learn what's more efficient, because you could actually technically, which we'll get to in a second, use the quadratic formula for every problem. Okay, if you use the quadratic formula for every problem, you would never get done with the test. You get done with like 10 problems, and then you'd have 20 more to go, and you'd cry because you didn't have the test done. All right. So remember, if you have two terms with no x term, use the square root method. Okay, that's the one with the star over here. All right. So let's use something a little bit different. What about if I give you 2x squared minus 12x equals negative 16? Well, you definitely know you're going to factor. And the deal is, there's two possibilities here. The one is you're just going to factor and solve. And what if you can't factor? What if the problem doesn't work? You can't factor it. Well, you're going to use the quadratic formula to solve. Okay, the quadratic formula solves anything. I mean, you might have no real solution, and then you'd put that on there, but in general, the quadratic formula is going to solve most of the problems. Okay, well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move that 16 over. So then I'm going to add 16 to both sides. Then I got 2x squared minus 12x plus 16 equals 0. And I see I can take out a 2, so I'm going to do that. So 2, and then I got x squared minus 6x plus 8 equals 0. Okay, so I can factor this. I kind of see I can do that. It's plus 8 and minus 6, so it's minus minus. And 4 times 2 is 8, and negative 4 minus 2 is negative 6, so 4 and 2. Of course, this is not one of the solutions. Remember that. It's x minus 4. Oops, x minus 4 equals 0, and x minus 2 equals 0. So add 4, x equals 4, and add 2. X equals 2. There we go. X equals 2 and 4. Okay? That's pretty easy schmeezy. So, again, let's say I get a problem like this. 2x squared minus 13x equals 5. Okay, well, we're going to move it over, so you get 2x squared. So let's see, we're subtracting 5, right, from both sides. So 2x squared minus 13x minus 5 equals 0. And, again, you always want to try to factor if you can. So 2x and x, and it's going to be, one's going to be plus and minus, and you get 5 and 1. That's all we have here, right, 5 and 1. And there is no combination, 5 and 1. That gives me negative 10x plus 1x is negative 9x. If I put the 5 here instead and the 1 here, that gives me 5x minus 2x is 3. No, okay, factoring is not going to work. So you want to do the quadratic formula, right? X equals opposite of b. So opposite of b plus or minus, just to remind you. You guys should remember, you should be seeing this in your sleep. Opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c over 2 times a. So, of course, in this case here, a is 2, b is negative 13, and c is negative 5. So x equals 13 plus or minus the square root of 13 squared. It's really negative 13 squared, but we know it's positive. It's going to turn to be positive. So b squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 5 all over 2 times 2. Okay, so I'm not doing anything fancy here yet. I'm going to put in my calculator 13 squared, and this is going to be minus 4 times 2 times negative 5. And that gives me 209 over 4. Once I have this, then I type in my calculator. So I'm going to say 13 plus the square root of 209, hit equals after you do the top, divided by 4. So I get 6.86. 6.86. that's for the plus, and then for the minus, we're going to do 13 minus the square root of 209 divided by 4 is negative 0.36. Negative 0.36. So there you go. Those are your answers. So if you can't factor it, remember I told you no decimals, so you got to use the quadratic formula. You got a decimal, round to the nearest tenth or hundredth or whatever I ask you. All right? But so let's kind of just review real quickly. If you don't have an x term, then you want to use the square root method. Okay? You want to try and simplify it and move, just like we did that one problem, you solve for x squared. The second thing is you want to try and factor it. If it's a trinomial, factor it and just solve it then. Set each one of those equal to 0. If it's not if it's not going to factor nicely, quadratic formula. That's going to be your best solution. But remember, quadratic formula is like last chance, okay, because it takes the longest. All right, so that's it, math fans. And this is solving any method. And I showed you these three because I want you to understand which one the best one is. Okay? No x term, square root method. X term, either quadratic formula or factoring, and that's it. All right. Hope you learned something, math fans. Have a nice day. Goodbye.